Thank you everyone for joining the Product Leader series today, where we bring together product leaders, authors, as well as practitioners to share practical lessons on building better product experiences, platforms, as well as services. Every product team is probably asking the same question right now. How do we know which ideas are actually worth investing in? While AI has made it easier to generate ideas, build prototypes, and move quickly, the real challenge isn't just moving faster anymore. Learning faster, as well as making better decisions with confidence, that's at the core. At Nagarro, we help companies turn ideas into products, platforms, and services for businesses across the globe. Driving AI-led transformations from the ground up is what we do. While the world around is changing every day and the capabilities are growing at an unprecedented pace, the fundamentals of building great experiences pretty much remain the same. That's why we are excited to welcome David Bland. David is an entrepreneur, product advisor, and the co author of Testing Business Ideas, a book that has become one of the leading guides to experimentation and evidence based innovation. Today, he'll share how AI can help us test assumptions, accelerate learning, as well as make better product decisions. But before we get started, a quick housekeeping note. Please drop your questions in the Q&A throughout the session. We will leave some time at the end to get to as many questions as possible. David, we are delighted to have you with us. I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself and take us into today's session.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to hang out and share some of what I'm seeing at companies all around the world at the moment. I'm going to share my slides and kind of jump in here. So a little bit about myself. Let me move you all over here so I can still see you. Yeah, so I'm gonna go into testing business ideas, but also and product ideas, but also how to do it with AI and how I am interweaving AI into it to be a little more thoughtful about how we apply it, just based on what's worked with me and what hasn't worked with me and my teams. Yeah, I'm an advisor out here in California. I was in Silicon Valley for quite some time, and now I'm a little further outside Silicon Valley. It's still in Northern California. But basically what I do is I kind of got pulled away from startups. My background initially was in startups, software as a service companies, a lot of B2B. And I learned the hard way, kind of what works and what doesn't work. And the first one was really successful. The other two were not. And I think I realized along the way that we needed to actually test what we're building, test before we're building, and also just make decisions that are informed. The way I frame them is this idea of commit. So you keep going forward with the idea, you correct it. So there's something you need to change about it, either the value proposition or the target customer or your channels, or your revenue model. And then some things we just cut. We cut things because it's really no point of taking it forward. And I think culturally we need to celebrate that. We need to celebrate that we are not wasting millions of dollars, bringing this idea forward when it doesn't have fit. And I think sometimes we're afraid to cut things. I was just keynoting at a conference last week, and that was a number one thing that came up with all the leaders in the room. It was a bunch of B2B companies, and they were really struggling with, well, I don't know how to actually cut something or kill it off. It tends to just linger around forever. So hopefully this will give you some ideas or a system to think through on how to cut things that you're not supposed to be working on as well. I am, again, a co-author of Testing Business Ideas. We've sold over 100,000 copies of this book. It's in 20 different languages. It's quite successful. And I think the reason it's successful is because it's very practical. I try to distill about 10 years of my coaching into a book. Spent about a year writing it with my co-author, Alex Osterwalder, who wrote Business Model Generation, Value Prop Design, and Invincible Company. So he's quite a prolific author. And it was just fun to pair with him and, try to put something out there in the world where people can read it and flip back to it and refer to it. It's not really a front to back kind of book, but it's something that hopefully is a very useful guide as you move forward, especially now with everything so uncertain. It's nice to have, your own little kind of reference guide to go back to when you're not really sure, what path to take forward. I work with all kinds of different companies. I really don't focus on a specific type of company. I work in software and hardware, in B2B and B2C. I would say the thing that's really common with the companies I work with is that they're trying to find new growth and they have a lot of uncertainty. And they're trying to find, what's this next revenue driver? I don't know if you're familiar with horizons planning. It's kind of like maybe a bit outdated at this point, but it's still really applicable. And the idea here is what percentage of revenue are you going to get in the next 5 years that are from businesses that don't exist or products that don't exist in your company? And it's a really interesting stat because sometimes I'll go into companies and I'll ask, well, like what percentage of your revenue comes from products that didn't exist 5 years ago? And I'll get varying answers. I'll get, well, we don't even use that at all. To my current client, they just hit 35%, which is above average, above average as far as it's usually somewhere around 20%, but it changes. But this idea of it's some of the hardest work you're going to do in the company is how do I find new growth? How do I find new revenue drivers? So when it comes to AI, it's kind of counterintuitive in a way. It actually doesn't accelerate the way you might think it does. So, and I'll just visualize this for you in a kind of like a simple process that I see inside my companies. So, all the companies I work with have some sort of funnel, you know, and where I see AI adoption happening at the moment is up here in Ideate, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. There are some really interesting tools out there now where you can cross pollinate or look for things. I just came from a demo of an AI company where, they look at all the context of your company and then they look at all these intersections of types of businesses that maybe you hadn't considered that are like tangential. It's really interesting what you can do. And you can do like 2 months of research in a day now. I mean, it's just amazing, like the sheer volume. But what happens is you're starting to get all these ideas coming in through the top here that are powered by AI or assisted by AI. And so if you look at this, how this happens to your funnel, what I see is, yeah, it helps you create a ton of new different ideas, but they sort of just kind of sit there. It's almost like not even a funnel; it's more like a bowl or a bucket. What tends to happen here is, the people here that are trying to pull these ideas through. Maybe you have some kind of cross-functional team. They're just like, what are we going to do with all of these ideas? Because the rest of this is still quite manual. I don't see a lot of companies using AI to help select, help make investment decisions, like which products are we going to invest in, which products are we not going to invest in. And then some are using it for launch. But, if you, depending on the company and your risk tolerance, I also see some companies, they'll just go from here right to here, you know, they're just like, oh, we work on vibes, we have vibes, so we're just going to launch stuff. And it can work in certain situations, but I think the kind of companies I advise, there needs to be a bit more governance around this. There needs to be a focus not just up here on ideation, but also here, like how do we use AI here in selection and in investing and launching things, because it's not really helping the overall like throughput of your products. Either people are just like vibe coding and just pushing them straight, to production, which can work depending on the type of business you have, but or they're just piling up all these ideas that just overwhelming this team over here, where they're not really able to bring them forward. So it's really interesting how constraints move around inside companies. And with AI, I'm noticing it's putting a lot of stress on the early part of our commercialization process and our product development lifecycle. So where I'm drawn to this over the last few years is, what system are we going to use, to help work with AI? you know, I want to reduce certainty in ideas. I want things to succeed. I obviously want companies to grow, but how do we work with AI in a way that feels as if we're not deferring our critical thinking skills and we're working with it? I keep using this word with. How do we work with AI to help test these ideas that we have? So one of the systems I use, and it's kind of a culmination of everything I've done over the last 15 years, I call it EMT. And the reason it's called EMT is it's more like extract, map, and test. And there are hints of that in my book, but the book came out in 2019, and definitely my thinking didn't stop at 2019. One of the things with books and why it's so hard to write one is that we're always evolving our thinking based on what we're seeing. So I don't completely contradict myself now if I go back and read it, but there are some things I would change for sure. And I think that's what makes it really difficult to put stuff in a print media and not something digital where you can easily, iterate on it. So with EMT, I'm just going to walk you through sort of the process. And I also want to show you and more focus on the AI aspects of it, of how do we use AI to help us along and build kind of this system, this like decision infrastructure inside our companies. So first is extract, and basically what we're doing here is we're going after assumptions, and there are assumptions in all kinds of our work, and they're not necessarily bad assumptions. It's just we need to talk about them, and we need to extract them and get them out and get them visible so we can manage them. So the way I've been using this with AI is I start with the team. What are the assumptions that we can use with a team? So if you think of product design, technology, some level of like your three circles that you all probably know really well. How are we getting these folks to come together and talk about what are the assumptions we're making in this product or in this service that we're building? Now, I think there's still some friction here, but I think it's a good friction. I'm a little worried about removing all the friction in our processes because I think some of these companies like coach and advise, within the friction, there's almost like implied safeguards. We couldn't launch something without us coming together and compromising on the direction of the product. And if we're not talking to each other and we're deferring to AI, yeah, we might go faster, but are we surfacing the things that we need to talk about? And are we justifying the spend? So there's a lot of stuff. Maybe friction is not the right word, but it's something. It's a word I keep coming back to, which is how do we keep the healthy parts of our organization intact, even though we want to go faster with AI? So quite often, what I do is I start with the team. We start writing down all of our statements, what would have to be true for this product to work. Now, I also uh, leverage AI here. Now, you'll notice that I started with the team and then we go over to AI. So when you think about whatever, agents or LLMs you're using, are we getting assumptions from this extracted in a way that it's thinking of things that maybe we haven't considered? So what I tend to see in practice anyway, and I'm only speaking from what I see inside of orgs right now, is that we take what the team has extracted and we take what AI has extracted, and there's a lot of overlap here in the middle. There's a lot of things they're pretty much the same assumptions, but they're just worded slightly different ways. Where I find the value in this process is in the edges. So when we think about value, it's here and it's here. It's, oh, what did the team come up with that maybe AI didn't consider? What did AI come up with that the team didn't consider? So I'm not looking for a perfect match. what I'm looking for is, the team has their own biases and blind spots. And can we use AI to find those and help find those? Now, it's also, you could go off and ask team members outside, your core team. You could bring in some of your leadership, obviously, but it's hard to get some of their time. So I like using AI just to see some of the blind spots in the assumptions. So one of the ways to do this, and I'll share this, this is in the resources tab, is I open sourced my Claude skill for doing this process. So I really do try to give back as much as I can in the industry when I have time. So one of the things I've done is I created a Claude skill that goes through this process. So it'll have you write down, and we'll play with this a little bit before I wrap up today. And then you can extract. And here's are just some examples. You can see it's using desirability, viability, feasibility. These are a lot of the themes that I use time and time again. Desirability be kind of like, can they or do they? Viability being more of a should we, and feasibility more like a can we. So it's a lot of customer risk, a lot of pricing and cost risk, a lot of execution risk. And I find no matter what company I advise, those hold up pretty well. They hold up pretty well. I also like pulling out the tension of where's this tension between them, because we're trying to unpack risk and make it into smaller chunks that we can go and test. But they're related. They're often related. If a customer doesn't want something, they're not going to pay enough, and there are situations where they want it, but they still won't pay enough. And then there's situations where they want it and they'll pay enough, but then you have problems executing. So your risk kind of moves around. And I really like these three themes. I write about them quite often. They're also in the book as well, and up in the front of the book when I talk through assumptions mapping. But this idea of extracting assumptions and getting them out and visible to work with. And this is me teaching at Stanford. I do teach this at universities at times when I can, and try to corrupt the younger generation and get them thinking this way. I also do a lot of business modeling, not business planning, but business modeling with them as well. But I do try to give back as much as I can, when I have time in between engagements. Now, the next part is mapping. So how do we get alignment on these assumptions? Because we wrote them down, which is great, but not everything's the riskiest assumptions. Not everything is going to make or break your entire product. So I helped create this tool called assumptions mapping. I first picked this up when I was working at Neo in San Francisco, and I was working with Jeff and Josh, who wrote Lean UX. And it was very interesting to try to use their 2x2, and I just kept changing it because it wasn't quite working for my teams. It's a good exercise, but I kind of folded in some themes and changed the labels, and basically I got to a point where Google reached out and said, "Hey, can we use this as part of our sprint framework?" So if you look at Google's kind of sprint framework, they have it referenced there now. But basically, it's kind of a 2x2 that's trying to get to this question, trying to get out this question of where should we focus? Where should we focus? And really where we're trying to get to is what's most important and where do we lack evidence? So that would be up here. I had the pleasure of working with Eric Ries back in the day, who wrote Lean Startup, and we would call these like a leap of faith assumption or a riskiest assumption. And so this idea of what are the things that could make or break the entire initiative? Let's not waste our time only playing where it's fun. Let's make sure that we're addressing the things that are really important, but we don't know if they're true. So I'll just give you a fun example. So this is a company where they scan your face and then they make glasses that perfectly fit your face. So they kind of use iOS, and they do this remote measuring of your face and take like a virtual measurement. You have to turn your head back and forth, just like this, or it won't work. So there is you have to keep it level, and you have to just move it back and forth, and it measures your face. So pretty cool. Lots of assumptions in a product like that. You have hardware, software, you have the B2B angle where you can sell through optometrists and retailers. You have B2C angle. Do people actually have this problem? So if you look at like their map, or a version of their map from a while ago, you can start to see they kind of have this cluster up here, right? And we usually write these as we believe, like we believe blah blah blah. So we believe eyeglass wearers feel discomfort in daily use. We believe retailers will pay $250 a month for our platform. We believe consumers will pay. It's quite expensive. It's over $500 for the eyeglasses. We believe that they'll trust it. Sometimes you have this really cool product, but people don't trust it, and that's a very frustrating place to be in. It's like, we know it's superior, but nobody trusts us, even though it works. So there's trust. There's all these different assumptions, and I like color coding. So the way I would color code these, see, the orange are the desirability. So these are desirability. You can tell they're around the unmet needs, jobs, pains, and gains of the customer, the value proposition, stuff like that. Viability, I usually put in green. So these are usually like cost and revenue. We can keep costs down by 3D printing. We can make enough revenue per month. And then feasibility, I usually put in blue, which are the more, can we do this? Now, I put regulatory in here as well. There might be regulatory challenges you have, or partnering challenges or things like that. It's not just about building the tech. I usually put things like that as well. But you end up with this really interesting view of where's our cross-functional risk for our initiative. And so you can do that also in Claude. You'll notice here, the way I do this is I map manually, and then I have Claude provide feedback based on a rubric that I've coded. Now, I've learned a lot of things over the last couple of years of like what to do and what not to do. So I'll just, share, learn from my mistakes as well. At first, I thought, if I just give it enough context, I think it can sort everything and map it all for us. Nobody appreciated that. And it's really hard to get the context in there. It's just so much context that it needs to have an accurate assessment of where your risk is. Now, it can use a general model and kind of guess, but even that, it's just really challenging. So what I've done is, over the years, I've changed this. And now what I do is I have the teams map, and then we use like a Claude skill to critique the map. And I'll kind of show you how this works with a sample map, if I can pull one up. And so the idea here is, you want to stress test it. You're going to have biases when you map things, and when you say, oh, I think this is important, or I don't think we have evidence. So it is good to have a coach or something give you feedback. But it just works better that way than trying to just defer to AI to map it for you. And again, I'm really sensitive to this idea of we're deferring critical thinking, and we're deferring, to AI to have it do it for us. So now we're moving on to test, which is, hey, how do we test? How do we get evidence? How do we go test these things that we've prioritized? So this is one of the reasons I wrote the book, Testing Business Ideas. It's really just like wildly popular book. It's, I think, last time I checked, like I've taught this at like Stanford and Harvard and Yale and MBA schools in Berkeley. It's just like a really interesting kind of textbook reference guide where I tried to put what I've seen over the last 10 years into a print format to say, here, this is what I've seen, and hopefully it helps you as well. So what I did, and I spent about a year on this, is I went through every experiment and we categorized them. So you remember these themes I was talking about. It's like desirability, feasibility, viability. So each experiment is tagged with one or more of those themes. So when you look at your risk, you can say, oh, you know what? I think that test will help us, And I haven't tried that one before, and I think this might help us. What I also did is again, it's in a general way, I basically put like what kind of resources you're going to need to run this. So think of like cost, like how much money is this going to cost to run? How long does this take to set up and run? At first, I combined those, and I realized, some tests, you set them up pretty quickly, but they might run a while. And then other tests, it might take a while to set up, but then you don't run it very long. So I actually broke those out into two. And then what kind of evidence strength is it going to throw off? Surveys, interviews are closer to 1 dot. Whereas if people are actually paying full price for the thing, your MVP, that is closer to $5, you know? So it's not, again, it's not perfect. Oh, and then I have capabilities as well, like what you're going to need. So trying to give you ways to choose what can I do to de-risk this product and make sure it's succeed. Now, one of the things, and this is in the resources tab as well, is I've digitized my library and I've really updated it based on my work and recategorized everything. And now the way I use AI here is I want, like, print is one way to choose, but there are 200 pages of experiments in that book. And as much as we tried to be, I don't know, just very user friendly on the design, you're still flipping through a bunch of pages trying to find the experiment you want. So what I've been working on is a library in JSON and CSV where it has all the updated kind of logic. So for example, what are the experiments I would run before this experiment? What are the experiments I would run during this? Maybe pair. Maybe I'm pairing an interview with something else. And then what are the experiments that line up really well after this? So what can I take from how I've ran this and learned and get the insights, and what would I do next? Because it's not a situation where you just run one test. You usually have to run a bunch. Okay. So I spent a lot of time just like digitizing that because I thought the book is a great way to get you started, but you can't really plug the book. I mean, I've had some folks do that. They just took the PDF of the book and they just jammed it in Chat GPT, and they're like, this doesn't work very well. And it's like, yeah, of course it doesn't work very well. You just kind of threw a giant PDF, at it. And so what are things you can actually plug into the agents you're building to give you sort of like a proven reference guide of business advice versus just relying on the general model, which is okay, but the general model usually goes after the lowest common denominator, and it's going to give you like the safest, like most generic experiment you can think of usually. So I like having them kind of like a better guide to power that. And also every company I work with, they kind of want their own version of the library. I spend a lot of time customizing it for, a B2B hardware company is not going to have the same library as a B2C software company. So this idea of how do we make this library kind of work for us? So basically what AI needs here, it needs context and reference. Otherwise you're going to get sort of kind of generic type experiments. And I'll give you a little demo of that in a few. So this is the skill. It's open sourced. I put this on GitHub and it's in the resources tab if you all want to check it out. And what I want to show you, sharing permits. What I want to show you is kind of like a fun example of how it works. I think I could talk about it. I think you'll learn just like watching me do it a bit. So I'm going to use this kind of fun example. So like I said, I do a lot of work in Silicon Valley. And why not have connected cats? I've been pitched crazier things than this, by the way. I'm not sure my cat would wear this collar. But this idea of, hey, we have a wearable for cats, and we want to add an AI feature. And we're going to charge $15 a month for this AI feature. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over here to Claude, and I just want to like show you the skill and play with it a little bit and just kind of show you how it kind of works so that you can get a better idea of if it fits into your day-to-day work. Okay. So I'm going to switch screens here, hopefully. Let's see. I think this will work. Oh, it's not letting me. Wait, there we go. All right. So can you all see my Claude now? Yeah?
Yeah, you see.
Awesome. That's great. All right. So first off, I don't want to say skills are completely new. Like they've been around for a little while. I would just say they're more popular now because it's almost like you get these little, it's almost like the Matrix. You get these little like digital superpowers that you can kind of plug in and say, oh, I want to use this as for this part of my day. Now, what I would not recommend doing is like going to somebody's giant collection of skills where they have like 50 skills and you say, I want all these skills and I'm just going to throw them at Claude, and this is going to be my whole stack. Like, I'm much more of a kind of like risk averse person. It's probably why I work on testing people's stuff to create new growth all the time. Is like, it's kind of therapy for me. But this idea of you know, it's very much a trial and error to figure out what skills are going to work for you and which aren't. So I'm not a big believer of just mass copying a bunch of people's skills. I'm much more kind of selective than that. But so what I do is I have the EMT skill here. I'm just using Opus 4.8 high. Fable's been like banned for now. This is fine. I like the higher ones just because it is a little bit more of like a nuanced complex thinking. So I like using it this way. So, but you can use this in Gemini or whatever, like whatever. You can have custom versions of this. I'm just going to show you the Claude skill today, but there are definitely different ways to do this in different stacks. So I'm going to paste in the cat idea. So remember, we have an AI feature that we're adding to our wearable cat device. Now, what it's going to start doing, remember the extract map test part? So it's going to think, hopefully, if it doesn't lag out here or didn't run out of credits. Basically, what it's going to do is it's going to start extracting the assumptions. So what I had to do was had to be very specific about the desirable, viable, feasible themes and what they mean. And I have to say, it still doesn't 100% get them all correct, but it applies that taxonomy to the assumptions. So what it's doing is kind of thinking through, and it's going to basically give you, again, I'm using the I believe format here. Like, what are the assumptions? And then what's the rationale for the assumption? So I added rationale in because it's kind of nice to know, like, what's your rationale by adding that in there? You know, what is that? Because I tried this with my team. We didn't think of this. Why is it here in your list? Okay. So you'll notice it came up here, some with desirability, like customers feel like they worry enough. It's usually a lot of like worry, trust, value proposition kind of stuff in desirability. Viability is usually around willingness to pay. So we have, you know, hey, will they pay $15 a month? You know, we have a big enough base of customers. The feature like will not raise churn or cause refunds because we added a new feature. And then feasibility is more about can you do it? Right. So it's like, can you do this? A lot of like technical risk. Now, the tension here, it's interesting because it calls out the tension. It's like, well, we believe that this willingness to pay, yeah. But if it cannot like really predict well, like if it doesn't actually work, then the viability is going to like collapse with desirability in a way. So there's a play between these different assumptions, which I like that it calls out because, you know, they're not in isolation. Now it's saying, hey, have you mapped yours? Have you like mapped it out? I've actually go ahead and created the map on this one just to save us some time. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw my map in. So remember that 2x2? I just created a 2x2 on this idea. And I want to critique it. I want to say, hey, what do you think? Like if I was coaching you on your map, I've seen thousands of maps, you know, what do you think I can improve about this map? Or what did I get wrong about this map? Or what did I forget that maybe I should have added? And so what it does is it kind of goes through my rubric and it says, okay, here's your map. And there's some common, oh, it says prompt empty. We'll see if it does it. Basically this idea of like some common anti-patterns that I see on assumptions maps. So one is like, oh, the top right is all blue. It's all feasibility. There's no risk around the customer or willingness to pay, which is not ever true, pretty much. Or there's nothing above the line, everything's below the line. Or like there's these patterns that I've seen time and time again over the years. And so what I've done is I kind of coded this in. So what it does is it looks at your map and it says, okay, I think this is interesting. You know, it looks like this is pretty close. I'm following the I believe format, so that's good. All three categories represented, so it's not just all blue, it's not all just build, but it does have some stuff to reconsider. It does go here and says, I don't know about this, about, your actual assumption about developing it. The desirability one about perceiving the need might ask what evidence supports that. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to critique you on things like, oh, we ran a survey, so that's validated, which is not normally the case. It's you need stronger evidence than a survey. And so this idea, and it kind of like runs through it for you so you can help. It's just like sharpen your critical thinking a bit. Now, not saying, hey, let's like grab an assumption and see how to design a test for that. So I'm going to grab this one. This one was about more of like the viability of whether they'll pay $15 a month. So let's see what it is there. So basically I'm saying, okay, I looked at my map. Thank you for the feedback. I want to know like what kind of experiment can I run for this? And there's not one right answer. It's usually there's more than one experiment you can run, and you'll probably run more than one experiment. Very rarely do you have just run one experiment and it completely validates. But here it's saying, you know what, you could try a smoke test. Basically, you're going to have a page with a call to action with an add my plan button, and then give them the way to kind of pre-order or opt in to this. Okay. So you can measure what you're going to measure, what success looks like, what failure looks like. Here's an estimated effort, but there's remaining uncertainty here because this doesn't tell you everything, right? It's not somebody that's actually paying full price for something that's launched yet. Okay. And you could ask like, what other experiments would help? Sorry, I have a very clicky keyboard. Test this. So it's not the only one, right? Now, granted, if you're going through my library, it's going to be all structured and all that. But there are other experiments that you can run. Maybe you'll run this one, or maybe there's some other experiment that you want to try to pay down your risk. So it's very interesting in the sense of, I think everyone's looking for like the single right answer. Like I want exactly the right assumptions map. I want exactly the right experiment to run. I want to know with 100% certainty. And our product work is never 100% certainty. Very rarely are we dealing with 100% certainty. It's, are we certain enough that this can move forward? Or should we park this thing or cut it? So you'll notice it's like, hey, you could A/B price test. And that's another one you could try. But basically what it's doing is like your kind of thinking companion, and it can help you along every step of the process. You can say, here are the assumptions, but which ones do you think? Like, what's the overlap? And you can say, here's my map. Get some feedback on that map. How is that prioritization? And then you could say, man, I'm really having a hard time coming up with an experiment. Is there a way that you can help me design a test, right? And it doesn't necessarily replace critical thinking, but it's giving you a way to kind of structure your work where it's like an extra team member. It's something that's helping you go through this flow. Now, what I want to do is I want to just kind of wrap up with a couple words here. So that, and I'll answer some questions on this too. So think of it like this. Let me make sure you can see my screen again. Yeah, we're all good. So basically, when you think about this, think about like almost like this decision infrastructure in your company. So you have all these inputs. You have your business assumptions, you have your desirable, viable, feasible, you have these experiments, like these patterns, and be kind of flexible into what this can integrate into. So everyone I've gone in and coached, like they use agents slightly different way. Some people use Copilot, some people are using Claude, some people are using like ChatGPT or Gemini. So don't be like too bought into one stack. They're all evolving so quickly, and then they change your terms of service, and you're like, oh, we can't even use that anymore because of the terms of service. It's all changing. It's very fluid. But having something that's like agnostic that can help you learn is really valuable right now, because this is just changing really quickly. But what's not going to change is launching stuff that nobody cares about. That is not changing. The technology used to help you do that certainly is very fluid. So I just want to give you a quick case study. You all can find this here when I give you the slides. Basically, I work with companies. I just want to show you kind of real numbers, because I know consultants never share real numbers. So I just want to share those with you. So one of my clients is DuPont. And what we've done is we ran 35 different businesses through this framework, and we went after every line of business in the company. And we saved $12 million. 12 million by cutting 43% of the stuff that they should not have been working on. 43%. That number can probably be higher in a lot of organizations, is my guess. And when you look at your commercialization and your product development lifecycle, there's a lot of stuff in there you probably should not be working on. Having a way to cut it out is actually going to save you millions of dollars. And then the stuff that we doubled down on has so far made $24 million. This is stuff that's launched in the market, and it showed evidence that gave us confidence that it was going to perform well. So it's not perfect, but I kind of like these numbers, 35 different ideas, making $24 million off of them, saving 12 million. So I have a much deeper dive of this if you're curious about it. And I'm just super happy that the team just won an award for this. So they got the Outstanding Innovative Culture Award from IRI this spring. And so that's Lindsay and Charlene and some of the team up there getting their award. But they're like, it's industry recognized of, wow, you changed the way you actually go about this. Specifically from a company that used to develop stuff in R&D, completely feasibility, and just look for ways to sell it. Like, this is a company that's made hundreds of billions of dollars doing that. Changing the culture to start with the customer. What are the unmet needs? And it's only build if there's a fit. It's a huge, huge mindset shift. So overall, I was just giving you a rundown today of EMT, of how to think about, what's a really simple system that you can use to go through this, and use AI to test with you, not necessarily for you. That would be my parting message for all of you before we do questions. Is it should be like an extra team member, where you're helping you go through the process, but it's not necessarily doing too much of the critical thinking for you or decisions for you. Decisions are human in nature. They come with accountability. They come with consequences. They're very social. And so keep that top of mind as you run through this and you're getting thrown all these AI tools. Be thinking about, am I deferring too much of my critical thinking to this tool, or is it more of like a team member that's helping me go through the process? All right. And we can take questions.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Dan. Super. David, sorry, David. Thanks for sharing that. It was super useful going through that, and I loved going through the different skills and the way you applied them. Folks, don't forget to drop your questions in the Q&A tab. Just one question actually that came up for me, David, was around the assumptions part, right? I think this is one of the hardest things for teams to come up with, right? I've seen it working in a lot of teams because everybody's so convinced that they know things so well, and actually admitting that 90% of what you're saying is an assumption is very hard for them. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's been definitely a journey for me. I've noticed that really strong, opinionated leaders have usually had like a career growth arc, something like this. They started off, learning a skill inside a company, or maybe even in college, and they became really good at that skill. And then people started coming to them and asking for help, or questions about how to do something, and they would give the answer. And then at some point, they move from like an individual contributor, maybe, and they put them in front of a team. And like, hey, you're going to help manage a team, and they're still treating it like, well, the team has to come to me because what I know, and I know the answer. I'm the expert. And then you may go all the way up to the C-suite that way. But at some point, it becomes a question of, can I create more leaders around me? Can I lead with questions, not answers all the time? Can I make it more about us than just me and what I know? So I find the people that struggle with this the most are the people who have been rewarded for being right or convincing people they are right along their journey. And so when I'm coming in, I'm more of like, hey, can you just tell me what's keeping you up at night? Like, what is really worrying you about this? And there's a good chance it's going to map back to those three circles. If it's about the customer, it's going to be desirability. If it's about pricing, it's going to be viability. If it's about your ability to actually build it, it's going to be feasibility. So I try to change my wording a bit, and I ask, what keeps you up at night? I ask, if we launch this and we're wrong, what does that cost us? Not opportunity cost alone, but also just cost of building this thing and launching it and everything. So I keep asking these questions, and then the map itself, it's probably not going to be 100% right the first time around. It's your best guess, and we come back to these maps. So it's something we do early on to just look at the risk, have a conversation. We use it to guide our testing, but it's something that evolves. The risk moves around, what we do changes. So the way I facilitate it, you can probably tell my vibe. I'm pretty good at taking a lot of the emotion out of the facilitation of it. I'm just more matter of fact, and I'm on the outside, so maybe that helps as well. But I found that people are really receptive to just making space to have a conversation about this versus everybody has their own risks in their head and they're not communicating. So I've not had a lot of pushback. I have to say, maybe it's also because I changed the labels over time. It used to be known and unknown, and that didn't go well because people would just say, I know. And then I tried certain and uncertain, and people would say, I'm certain. And then I'd say, why are you certain? And they would say, I know. And so it didn't work. So when I got to evidence, though, that has taken a lot of the awkwardness out of the conversation, because we just say, hey, is there evidence here? What's the evidence you have? You either have some or you don't, and what kind of evidence? Is it surveys, or is it people actually paying full price for this? So it's definitely a mindset shift. It definitely takes some time to have it permeate your org. But I have to say, out of everything I've created last 15 years, that 2x2 or that 2x2 I helped create, that is by far the most popular thing. I mean, that is, people get really excited coming out of that session saying, oh wow, we actually know what's important now and where we have to focus. And I just think there's something missing in our commercialization process or our product development lifecycle. We have all this risk management, but we don't come together and discuss it this way. So there's something about it that just, it's like a structured conversation that helps clear the air. And I think that's really refreshing.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. I do have one follow-up question on that, David. I think, especially when we're working with larger enterprise organizations, right? Of course, there are multiple teams running experiments all the time, but I think we still end up in this situation where I think maybe let me ask it this way: what's the biggest organizational barrier that you noticed, especially in enterprise environments, where how much of this is truly evidence driven versus it's still the rush to get it out?
Oh, there are a few things I think that play just from an organizational point of view. One is functionally siloed orgs that only run projects. This is really tough because everything's treated as a project, which means your teams are probably multitasking across multiple projects. They're probably not very stable. They get pulled off and on to different projects. The project, vastly changes. The team dynamic changes after whatever it is has launched, and now it goes into maintenance mode. They're not maybe incentivized to talk to each other. Everyone reports up their different function, and they kind of just stay in their silos, and the risk never really gets shared. I would say that's probably one of the biggest things that makes this difficult is if your org is structured in a way where people are not incentivized to talk to each other and you're just kind of heads down doing work all the time. The good news is I've been a part of a lot of different orgs lately that are really trying to build out their product capability, and they realize that maybe they call them products, but they're really just projects, and their product managers were kind of acting like project managers, and they didn't really have a product capability inside their org. So I do see that changing, and I do see a trend towards more cross-functional teams. So sometimes we call them in a box, like I was talking to Walmart, like a VP at Walmart, and he's like, oh, we have 4 in a box, so they have like an extra role in there. Some companies have 3 in a box or 2 in a box, but this idea of we're collaborating across functions and we're trying to organize around things versus staying in our silos. So it's really, really tough, I think, to do this well if you're functionally siloed only running projects. Everything else, I think, for the most part, is manageable. You know, it looks a little different in each side inside each org, but when you're functionally siloed, it makes it really, really hard.
Makes sense.
Maybe we can go to some questions from the audience that came through. So, and it's kind of related to this one. What right? One came through was which industries are underusing experimentation?
Which industries are underusing? You know, I don't know if it's an industry per se, but it's definitely a trend with these hyper growth companies that it's almost like there is no incentive or there's no time to experiment. And I don't think that's industry specific. I've seen this in really, really heavily regulated industries. Like I've been pulled into pharma companies. I've been pulled into financial institutions, healthcare. You know, you name it. Space exploration, deep sea exploration, like a bunch of risk adverse, pretty regulated industries. But what I see more common is if you're kind of like on this rocket ship that's scaling and it's just you're along for the ride. It's almost like the team that joined Google early on, you know, when it took off. It's like, yeah, you're going to make choices at Google, but you're pretty much along for the ride, you know? Today, it's more like, you know, my clients that are doing AI chip manufacturing. They're just trying to keep up with demand, you know? So I would say it's hard to say, you know what, we need time to de-risk this. We need to run experiments on this when everything's just moving so fast and you're trying to keep up with demand. And I've always had the same conversation with every executive in those companies. And it's, this is not going to last. I just had one of these conversations last week. You know, this is not going to last. You need to start investing in this now before your growth stops and it starts to decline, because that is not the great time to start. And everyone's going to be emotionally kind of anxious, and that's not the best time to start. So it's almost like innovator's dilemma in a way. Still, I wish it wasn't, but it's the hyper growth companies that are just making money hand over fist and they've caught a wave. I find it's really hard unless you have leadership support and they understand the value and value it. They're going to just put it off and say, no, we have other stuff we have to do. Yeah, I think that's dangerous because it's not going to last, you know, unless you're like Nvidia, who manages to catch every wave somehow, you know. But most companies are not like Nvidia. So that's something I would point out. Not necessarily an industry specific one, but more of a almost like the market condition specific of a company. I've seen that happen time and time again.
Maybe Nvidia's already got the experimentation going, and so hopefully.
Sure. Lots of dollars spent on R&D.
Exactly. One other question, right? Have you seen any best practices in experimentation become outdated over the past 2 to 3 years?
I don't know about outdated, but definitely there are experiments that aren't as applicable. For example, there are some experiments in testing business ideas I don't really run anymore. One would be, so I put 404 tests in there because the time I wrote the book, some of these big travel companies like TripAdvisor were just literally launching stuff so fast that they wouldn't even put like software behind the actual links. They would just count how many errors happen. Not too many companies do that anymore. It kind of looks like your stuff's broken. And also, there are many ways you can measure stuff, and we're usually not going that fast. Some other ones like mock sales, where you go through this really elaborate sales process, but then you don't close the sale. It's kind of, not as common anymore, because if you put all that effort in, why not just actually sell? So there's some that I see not as common that were in 2019. And then the practices themselves, I mean, the tools are just getting more and more sophisticated. So a lot of these calculations, the tooling does it for you now. Whereas in the past, you'd have to like go find an A/B test calculator and all that stuff. So I wouldn't say, I mean, at the core of it, it's still, hey, you have a hypothesis, you have assumption or a hypothesis. You're going to look for what proof that needs to be there to prove or disprove it or support it or refute it. You're running a test to generate that. You're looking at the output of that. You're getting insights from that, and you're using those insights to drive what you're doing next. So at the core, like the scientific method hasn't changed. I would say the tooling a bit has changed, and then culturally, and some of the experiments are not as applicable anymore. But I would say at the core, it's scientific method applied to product and business.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that. And right, the tools have changed so much since we started doing experiments, right? And everything's updating all the time. Now, I actually have one for you, David, around the Claude skill you were sharing, right? I thought it was super useful to an extent. In the case you shared with us, the map you put together was just one that was created by Claude, right? But as you mentioned, in the ideal state, you would mix between team and Claude assumptions in terms of mapping out
Oh,
the 2x2, right?
oh, to clarify, so that map I uploaded was one I created.
Okay.
So basically, what I did is I used Mural or Miro, whichever one you want to use, or PowerPoint or Keynote. It doesn't matter anymore. But I literally just like used virtual stickies and created a 2x2 based on where I thought the risk was, and then uploaded a picture of that to Claude. So it can create them for you. I just not had a great enough results with that. So that one was actual screenshot of something that I created. But basically, the teams I coach, they would take a screenshot and then upload it and then get feedback on it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and in that is even when you're doing with the teams, you would map out those assumptions with the ones that were generated by the team, but also mix in ones generated by Claude. So doing that.
Correct. Yeah.
And
And
actually,
there's a lot of overlap. I would say it's about 70 to 80% overlap, because a lot of them are going to be similar assumptions around, do they have the unmet need, or will they pay enough, or your ability to do it. But the ones that are, like I said, on the edges, I find really fascinating, because there are ones that you're like, oh, I haven't thought of that one. I'm going to include that. And then when you do your map, you can say, okay, give me feedback on that. So I think it's more of it's almost like it's more than the sum of its parts, the collaboration, because you are potentially, including things you might miss altogether otherwise.
yeah, awesome. I mean, I could
It
keep
also
going.
creates that. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it also creates this interesting feedback loop that is pretty useful in group exercises too, right, David? I'm assuming. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, before I started using AI, I would just basically, we would do the maps together. I'd have maybe 5 to 7 teams in the same room, and then we would share out to each other, and they'd all learn or be able to help each other. So there is this idea of helping each other out, right? So I still suggest and recommend doing that too. But if you have one team that's going through the process, having something that's like an extra team member who can spot blind spots is basically how I use it.
I mean, I could keep going with questions, but sadly we're on time, right? Any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with, David, just before we switch off?
Yeah, just don't defer your critical thinking skills to AI. It's going to be very easy to do because it's very seductive in that way, and it's going to engage you in a way where it kind of wants to make those decisions. I would say resist that. Be aware of when you're doing that. And again, it's testing with and not having it do it for you, I could say. And if any of you have any questions, I threw up my QR code there. I am available after this as well. This is all I do all the time. I've been doing this since 2011 at this point, 2010, 2011. So, and the tools change, but the people, the issues, the problems don't. So keep an open mind, be open to the idea that you might be wrong, and it'll go a long ways no matter what tools you use. So the mindset is going to be really, really important.
Thank you so much for that, David. And, we appreciate you joining us for this and sharing your expertise with us. It was super useful. And hopefully the audience is taking away a lot of new ideas, and we're going to see tons of experimentation happening left, right, and center. And again, for the audience, don't forget to join us. There's more episodes of Product Leader Series coming up. We have the lineup coming up, and we want to just bring you the best industry leaders like David to you, so that you can all interact with and learn from them, and build your expertise and your know-how. Really appreciate
Appreciate your time, David. Again, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining.